This episode has been supported by Bow Concept Scotland. The Danish interior specialist offers a range of customisable furniture and accessories for the home and workplace. Bow Concept Scotland offers a free interior design service, a guarantee for a lifetime, and installation throughout the country. The team is delighted to announce the countdown to a new store opening on Ingram Street, Glasgow. Keep an eye on @bowconcept.scotland on Instagram for further updates. Exciting times. Stores are currently in Buchanan Galleries and Princess Square, Glasgow, plus Edinburgh, Rose Street. Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Homes and Interiors Scotland podcast. I'm Gillian Welsh and I edit Homes and Interiors Scotland magazine, as well as presenting our reasonably new podcast. I was interviewed for episode 1, which you should check out if you haven't had a chance to listen to yet. However, today I'll be interviewing a special guest, and this will be what you can expect from future episodes. We thought the best way to set off on our Homes and Interiors podcasting journey would be at the very start of the process of creating a home. So today we'll be interviewing architect Lorn Macneal. Lorn established his architecture practice in Edinburgh in 1982 and has since worked on some fantastic award-winning projects all over the country, which you'll be hearing more about later, as well as hearing about what it was like being on the other side of the home building process with his new home in Edinburgh, which was also featured in our July-August issue, and you can also read over on homesandinteriorscotland.com. We'll be asking Lorn not just about his own home and standout projects, but also how to tackle renovating or even building your own dream home. Hi Lorn, thank you very much for coming in today to feature in episode 2 of the Homes and Interiors Scotland podcast. You've already complimented my shoes this morning, so I know this is going to be a good interview.
It's my pleasure to be here, and I'm hugely grateful for being invited along, and do hope I can give you an idea as to what architects do and what we set out to achieve for our clients.
Okay, does an architect have a signature style? And if so, what is yours?
I think when we're talking about domestic architecture, it would be very inappropriate to use the word signature style, because really what you're doing is reflecting and responding to your client's expectation. The word I use is empathy, and I think with empathy, you're working with your client to try and achieve a house in a style that they would like, feel comfortable with, and contentment within. Mm-hmm. If I do have a style, I would try and embrace modernity at contemporary home, which is very much supported through the planning system. The planning department wants to embrace contemporary architecture as a reflection of today, so that in the future it will be remembered as that. However, if a client has a traditional house and they want it to be pastiche in that traditional style, then we will try and seamlessly provide that for them. I think if you look at our website, you'll see a complete range of houses, and that very much reflects what we're trying to do in achieving for our clients what they would like to have.
You've recently been client instead of architect. How did you find that experience?
It's interesting that throughout my life I've been acting for clients in designing houses, extensions, and I've had huge pleasure from that. But like most architects, it's always your wish and aspiration to be involved in your own house. I set about it thinking that it would just be like any other project, where my job has been to elicit instructions and decisions from a client, trying not to overwhelm them by looking for too much information at once, and make them enjoy the process. It should be pleasurable, and trying to keep the stress levels down is so important. So when it came to myself, I thought, well, this should be really quite easy, but by jingo it wasn't, because for the first time in my life, I found myself on the other side of the fence and not having to ask for decisions or assist the process, but actually making them. Drawing back, an awful lot of it is about collaboration with the design team, and that's not just the architects who I work with who help this process, but also the interior designer and of course my wife, who is as much about choosing the house and how it should be finished as I do. We worked very hard together, and at the end of the day we think we got most things right. The whole process really is evolutionary in terms of from inception to completion. You have to make decisions, you have to make the right decisions, but with the team effort we get there. And now, having done that, we can really enjoy our house, but most certainly I'll reflect when dealing with clients in the future and try to better help them through that process.
How did you deal with the stress?
There is the initial stress and anticipation of having to deal with the planning process, which is never quite straightforward. But once we get through that, the main stresses start to occur during the building process. During the past 30 years, I've seen a gradual erosion in the construction industry. 30 years ago, tradesmen were very much time-served individuals who worked through long and arduous apprenticeships. They were complemented by the demise of the great shipping industry, where many skilled men came from that and joined the building industry. They were men of skill, men of diligence, men of competence, who worked well with the architect and their clients to deliver a product, very much in the adage of what they could achieve. Sadly, things have slipped in standards, and we're finding it now with many contractors having gone into bankruptcy through the various recessions, with a very limited marketplace there for contractors to tender from. There are one or two good contractors, don't get me wrong, but generally we're finding it harder and harder to deliver to the client a product that we want them to receive. That can be stressful. It is something that we do work on and ultimately do hope we deliver. I would though say it's unfair to tar every contractor with that brush, as there are some who generally do punch above their weight and do work hard, but these tradesmen do come at a cost premium which not everyone wants to accept. There are also the artisans who provide a wonderful skill base, but again, the costs of these are at a level which very few clients would wish to consider in their projects.
What does home mean to you?
I think a home must be warm, inviting and intimate. There's a lovely Scottish word, cúthaí, which to me best sums up what that is. A home should provide comfort, sanctuary, privacy, and best protect your amenity away from all forms of nuisance. Above all, it must offer you pleasure. It embraces style, light, aspect, form, and should give you a spring in your heel every time you walk through the front door. It must avoid sterility. I think there are one or two people who look upon their homes as a trophy house, like a cappuccino cafe, where people are scared to move, touch, or really even be there. One of the greatest moments we have is when the house is completed, and there's a party, and we're the belle of the ball, and there's so much to share, so much enthusiasm, and just seeing the contentment in our clients, it is for us hugely gratifying. I can't overemphasize just what an emotional journey it is, being involved with the client from concept to completion of their projects, where we must establish mutual trust, respect and understanding. I hope our website will testify to many clients who have become indeed good and loyal friends through that emotional process.
What are the 3 things listeners might not consider when extending or renovating their own home?
I probably use the word not fully appreciate, then consider. First, there are too many who confuse cost with value. Building a new home is probably the biggest financial investment most will ever make in their whole lives, and from that they must elicit best value and certainly not cheapness. I was told from a young age that you can't afford cheapness, and part of our skill set is to convince our clients exactly that, convincing them that they should invest in the design team with a fee sufficient to explore and create architecture, and in turn having a building that we can deliver as a quality product. What is hugely important to us is the whole collaborative process we enjoy within our office, where we all contribute thoughts and ideas for each other's works. It's always reassuring for us to know we've explored every avenue, leaving no stone unturned towards creating what we hope is a responsive design solution. We need time to engage fully with our clients, not only in the design, but in engaging with them throughout the journey. Communication is so important, and the huge amount of time we need to invest during that administrative period to make sure the product is delivered. There are clients who look for bargains, who try and knock our fees down, and invariably they work with somebody else. The odd thing is we bump into these years later. I can see they're not unhappy, but I can also see how much better the house could have been had they invested in our time or somebody else's to get the thing right. That is hugely frustrating to us. Timescales are another issue that clients can't quite come to terms with. They can watch television programs where houses are delivered in a matter of days or weeks. They don't appreciate the amount of time spent in designing the house before even taking it to the planning process. The planning process itself is protracted, and then we must take it through building warrants, working up technical drawings that can allow the contractors to price the work. The contractors then must price it. These must be checked before we can even set a foot on site. So that is a long time scale, but one that few clients fully appreciate before they embark on the journey. Finally, there's the underestimation of really the time and commitment they have to put into the project. Some start off on the basis that they just want us to get on with it. They want to turn up a year and a half later with a suitcase and move in. But many of them move from that to becoming involved, not just involved, but having great enthusiasm and passion to sharing every part of that journey. And that is a commitment, and certainly one that not many appreciate from the outset.
Is it possible to stick to a budget?
I think that's a very cynical question, madam, and certainly it's not an unreasonable question, because most certainly there are many stories out there where costs have well exceeded budgets. I try from the very outset to be forthright and make sure clients are aware of costs and where they will lie. There are principally two parameters that control costs. One is size, the other is quality. We go through an initial feasibility, and in that feasibility we ask the client what accommodation they would ideally like in terms of living space, bedrooms, utility and whatever. And from that we can quickly establish the approximate square metre area that house should be. We also discuss quality, and quality is very important in terms of the broad range of costs from the basic right up to a very high specification. In completing a feasibility, we tend to give the clients a shopping list of costs from which they can cherry pick, and from that very much nail where their costs should lie. In some ways, become involved in the design of a house is like going to a showroom and buying a car. The garage would offer you a sunroof, we could offer you a conservatory. You can be offered extra speakers, we could offer you surround sound or a home cinema. What's also very important to ensure that the costs we report are independently advised by a quantity surveyor. That quantity surveyor doesn't only work with us, but with several other firms of architects and indeed contractors. So he really has his finger in the pulse and knowing where the market lies, and can make sure that these costs very much align with what your initial expectations should have been. Built into the costs is also a contingency amount of money. That's a pot of money that can basically be there, maybe 10%, which seems quite a lot, but it's there to cover the unforeseen risks that might arise during the construction period, and just to make sure that costs don't overrun, and instead we work within your budget. Transparency in costs is so important to us as architects to make sure that we do deliver the product on cost. But where costs do creep, it can invariably arise from additional works the client instructs. What we must do in that situation is make sure the client is aware of these costs, they are monitored, and they do recognise at the end of the day that if they increase, that is why.
Okay, what should you spend money on and where can you economise?
It goes back to what I said before, that the two main drivers are being the square foot area of the house and the quality. Certainly when we go back and look at costs, we can say, well, you only get one chance to make a first impression, and getting the whole way right is important. The main space being the kitchen, living, dining hub, you have to keep that as a large space, as indeed the master bedroom, but you can economise the bedroom areas, which people don't use an awful lot. And people get confused by living in large houses where bedrooms have always had a large space, but in modern houses that isn't really necessary. But then you can look also at the interiors, the finishes. If you put in your drawing room 20 recessed LED lights, that might cost over £1,000, whereas to put two nice light fittings from John Lewis might cost you a change of £150. And you can economise on hardwood flooring. You can lay carpets in the first place and go back and revisit and put hardwood floor in later on. You don't have to build the conservatory, and you can also design the house in such a way that it can be extended as a second phase when funding may facilitate that. Externally, there's significant savings that can be made where people can move away from tradition. Slater work is an expensive finish, and people put slates onto roofs because they have always been browbeaten into the belief that flat roofs leak, an issue of post-war austerity when roofing felts were very cheap. But the new high-performance single-ply membranes and zinc and other metal roof finishes are hugely efficient, hugely effective, and will last decades and are a lot less expensive than slate, and also contribute much more towards contemporary architectural forms. Also, stonework is a hugely expensive external cladding when you can now use cement renders to good effect, sheet metal cladding, and indeed larch boarding, which many houses use. And if you think that's going to be an issue with weather, you just have to look at the north of Scotland, where many, many houses are clad in larch boardings, the black houses, which you read about. So yes, you can claw back costs significantly in what the quantity surveyors describe as value engineering in all these areas and more. Finally, I would add that architects shouldn't be proud that when we come to negotiate the contract with the contractor, he too has his ideas, and we should listen and if he finds there are construction methods that he might think are less expensive, or indeed suppliers who can provide components, fixtures or fittings at a lesser cost, then of course we should listen and include these as part of the cost-saving exercise.
Okay, what are the challenges to modernising an old building?
That's interesting because really the backbone of our practice has for many years been involved in altering, extending and subdividing historic houses, villas and estate homes across Scotland. Of course these properties have their challenges, but with sensitive alteration and extension they can create a stunning contrast between the old and the new. Listed buildings are of course perceived as more precious where planners can resist change unless presented in a cohesive, constructive and compelling manner. An issue with old buildings are that traditionally they had coal fires burning everywhere, and the coal fires created a draft, and the windows rattled to let air come into the room. Now we've moved away from coal fires, and people look towards central heating. They look towards sealing their windows, sealing their doors, and they're in fact creating an hermetically sealed box. Added to the use of showers, baths, and body moisture, they create a whole different dynamic. It requires the introduction of mechanical ventilation, thermal insulation, and damp-proof courses to keep these homes comfortable. In buying a new house, many people are overwhelmed about how inflexible it might appear, but really, when you've been involved working in these buildings for a long time, you realise very quickly that so many walls can be removed, openings created. Meeting an architect early on can offer a comfort in addressing most of these issues, in the full realisation that so much can be achieved through commissioning a feasibility with budget costs. Very often, traditional houses have the kitchens in the rear room facing a yard, where the kitchen is served through the hatch into a dull dining room. In townhouses, it's no different, where these rooms are in the basement or lower basement, which were subservient and appropriate to the social history of that period. As I've discussed, the most important room now in any house is the kitchen, living, dining space, and that really has to be in the brightest, lightest room of the house, and that changes the whole dynamic of the house again, and the challenge in ensuring that these spaces can be adjusted to cater for modern lifestyle living.
The environment is very much on everyone's minds at the moment. What kind of innovations and technologies can boost a home's eco-credentials, and what are the benefits?
Well, first of all, I'd say the building regulations now are hugely onerous, which is a great thing because the levels of insulation you must put into a house and the heat loss you're allowed through glass is so demanding that, for instance, in the house we've just built and we're enjoying living in now, we've not had heating on at all right through the cold winter. But there are other initiatives that the building regulations also insist upon. We must use either heat recovery system, ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps, or solar voltaic panels on the roofs. Several years ago, renewable grants were thrown at homeowners, allowing green energy tariffs to be applied over a 25-year period. These were so generous that people leaving windows and doors open would actually make money from that process. Most of these grants have now gone, and unfortunately the benefits have become more marginal. But for many it's not about cost, but the comfort of knowing that you're drawing heat from the ground or electricity from your solar panel. I'm a director of solar and wind applications in Ayrshire. We're now installing many storage batteries to allow homeowners to store power during the day when it's being generated and dissipate that in the evening when it's needed. However, the biggest problem is really in older properties where it's much harder to insulate against heat loss, especially those that are historically listed, where you can't alter walls where they have historic cornices, where you can't upgrade windows that have got traditional crown glass. Ironically, in Edinburgh, we can't even put solar panels in the World Heritage Site, where greater prominence is given by the city fathers to the aerial view of the city rather than their pledge to hit energy targets. However, it's fair to say that many clients in non-listed buildings do invest significantly in the capital costs of insulating and double glazing the property. Often these costs can't be reconciled economically, but it's all about their lifestyle, their comfort, and how they want to enjoy their home.
Aside from your own home, what's your favourite project you've been part of?
Gosh, that's a hard call. I've been involved in so many projects over so many years. I should perhaps single out not one, but two. The first is the gable extension to a terrace home in the West End of Edinburgh. I'm cheating slightly because it in fact was our last home. We wanted to create a large kitchen, dining, family space, the theme of so many projects we've done on behalf of many clients, where the family life evolves around the kitchen, both for everyday use and for entertaining. It was a contemporary space clad in copper and not hugely expensive. The architecture created a remarkable wow factor. It was a great party space, and so unexpected for any guest to enter in from the formality of the Victorian entrance and hallway. It gave so much enjoyment for children to grow up in. I was just delighted with it. The other was for a good friend and client who had an old smithy house in Gifford, a listed building where the kitchen and living room were awkwardly separated. Here we created a modest extension which linked these two spaces together through the garden room, which made the whole house work wonderfully well. Every time I see him, he talks about it, and certainly we're proud of what we achieved for him there within a modest scale and cost.
Let's talk about biggest build challenges. Can you think of a particular project that encountered big difficulties and what you learnt from it?
I think probably the biggest one was actually a project for myself, where I acted both as architect and developer. In Gillen in East Lothian, the Queen's Hotel had fallen into disrepair. It had been fire ravished, it suffered from extensive dry rot and structural problems, and in 2008 I felt up for the challenge, and by goodness it was a challenge. The 16th century structure had to be consolidated to enable the core to be removed and the new flats created, in essence, as a new building within the existing historic structure, all to meet the current regulations including full lift access. Every flat was different, combining restored traditional rooms with new extensions. Each were totally different in their amenity and aspect, with two modern homes built to the rear set in the historic walled garden, each having direct access onto Goose Green at the rear. For me, it was a great commercial success, with most apartments selling off plan. But it was hugely challenging, but equally immensely satisfying project to work through, with the ultimate accolade of being voted the Scottish Homes Housing Development of the Year. In terms of learning, I would say I've been practicing architecture for 30 years. I'm still practicing it, hoping getting better at it. And the challenges and experiences of this project will carry forward to be shared with my team to benefit for all our future clients.
What architects do you admire?
I think I've always been a great admirer of the arts and crafts period, and none more so than our great Charles Rennie Mackintosh and all that he achieved in his lifetime. But it's very important I had his wife Margaret MacDonald, who was also hugely influential both in his life and his architecture, and very much part of their team. Sadly, the social order of that time could not recognise her for her empowerment and all that she had contributed. Hill House is quite brilliant. Not only is it an extraordinary piece of architecture, but the amount of detailing that Mackintosh and MacDonald entered into was really quite mind-blowing. It was the furniture, and not just the furniture, it was painting the furniture, the stained glass windows, the ironmongery to the doors and the windows, and even the cutlery were all designed by Mackintosh. It was quite sublime and bewildering, and I raise my hat to all that they achieved in that building. But in Spain I visited many of Gaudi's works, and he too was an extraordinary exponent of architecture, and very similar, not just in the creative work that he achieved, but also, sadly, later in his life, he, like Mackintosh, became impoverished and suffered from poor health. Across in America, the other great architect was Frank Lloyd Wright. I've had the pleasure of seeing many of his houses, and I've enjoyed them hugely in terms of their scale, mass and form, but I feel a little bit let down there in that the detailing I don't think was really quite as refined as Mackintosh and Gaudi had achieved, but still a pretty special architect.
What's your favourite building and why?
I think there only can be one, and that's the Guggenheim in Bilbao by Frank Gehry. It is the most extraordinary piece of architecture I ever clapped eyes on. It also was hugely influential as a catalyst in the rebirth of Bilbao as a city. Before it was built, it had fallen hard times, industry declined, commerce had declined, the Basque separatists were extorting the government, and the city really was on its knees. They were very bold and very brave, and they took on Frank Gehry to create this piece of architecture, and really has kick-started the whole economy. And now so many other architects have followed into the city, creating good architecture. It's become a great hub of tourism in the north of Spain, and it really is impressive, and that man Gehry should be freeman of their city. I'm also very excited about his latest project, which is in Abu Dhabi, where he's creating a museum out there. And given the drawings I've seen so far, plus the amount of money that the Abu Dhabi government will throw at it, it's going to be something that will be very, very special.
Where does inspiration come from?
Here it's very difficult because most of my life I've worked with private clients. I've very much talked on the subject that my inspiration from them comes from their work and the products we deliver to them. But I suppose I'm most inspired by my extraordinary team I have in my office and the privilege of working with them, who collectively collaborate towards creating, with care, thought and sensitivity, all that we set out to achieve. Estate agents talk about location, 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 but our attitude is very much why? There are always room for improvement, and we seek to elicit the very best out of each and every one of our projects, leaving no stone unturned in delivering thoughtful and creative architecture. But of course there's always the subconscious plagiarism that evolves in looking, admiring and emulating any work we see. And that's the greatest compliment you can offer any architect.
If you could give one piece of advice to someone who is considering building from scratch, what would it be?
I think although I've talked about my firm, I should go out there and say there are many firms of architects who share the similar passion for work and creativity, but all recognise this must be reflected in the levels of fees we must charge. We consider this as an investment and would urge any client to recognise that rather than going with the false economy in investing in discounted fees. Really all I've mentioned is very much from the heart, and the piece of advice is enjoy the journey and share the pride in creating your own very special home.
In each episode, we'll be asking guests to prepare a quick how-to snippet that can be on anything they like. We discussed how to clean behind a radiator last episode, and we're giving them completely free rein, so we're very excited to hear the results. Lorn, what's your how-to?
This confused me slightly, as I'm not very good at cryptic clues, but I'll give it a go. I think probably how to get over the disappointment of not getting the house that you set your eyes on. So many times I've shared the disappointment with clients who have bid for a house, been unsuccessful, and felt their world's going to end because really that's one for them. I'm a believer in every cloud has a silver lining, and so many times I've shared the emotional turmoil with clients who haven't got the house they wanted, had their hearts broken, and we have to pick up the pieces. So architecture is not just about designing a house, it's also the social counselling of my saddened clients. But invariably, there is the silver lining. So a few months later, when the right house does come along, they draw back and think, gosh, this is the right house. And they're only so happy that the house they had hoped to get, they didn't get. And that's all part of life's rich tapestry. I'm a believer in destiny.
Thanks for listening, and please don't forget to rate, review, subscribe. Our next episode will feature Alison Williamson of Birkwood, a cabinetry company who does innovative work with plywood. The September-October issue of the magazine is out on the 23rd of August, available across Scotland in all good retailers. You can subscribe from just £18 for a year or read online via the Homes and Interior Scotland app or on Readly. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Pinterest by searching for Homes and Interior Scotland. And thanks again to Bow Concept Scotland. We're looking forward to visiting the new Glasgow store when it opens. Keep up to date on Instagram or head to bowconcept.com.